Hi, JJ. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about Reef World, environmental science, how y'all are working to help conserve all of the ecosystems around the world. I'd love to hear about how you first started caring about the oceans, first started getting into this diving and environmental world.
Well, thanks for inviting us, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So thanks to you and to Dan. Well, it's going back a while. I'm getting older and older, but I've always just been passionate about the marine environment. I think you probably have similar stories from everyone here at DEMA saying the same thing. As a kid, I just really enjoyed beach holidays. So I grew up in the UK, in the southwest of the country, which is close to some gorgeous beaches down in Devon and Cornwall. So I spent a long time in my childhood there playing on the beaches and stuff. So I've always been fascinated by the rock pools and the marine life that lived in them and in the sea and everything. And then I got a bit older, and then I found out you could study it. It was a thing. So marine biology was something that I always wanted to get into. So that's kind of where I got into diving was through getting through the science of things with marine biology. As my course at university at Newcastle.
Awesome. That's a very similar story to me. You know, those of us who are lucky enough to live near the ocean as young folks tend to have that passion developed at an early age. So after studying, I know the UK, the ecosystems there aren't very similar to what a lot of Reef World is focused on. How did you make that transition from caring about those colder ecosystems into learning more about the tropical ecosystems of it all?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my course was spent on time out on boats and on the shorelines of the coast up in the northeast of England. So this is facing the North Sea, and we're often there in the middle of winter. Horizontal snow, it wasn't ideal. It wasn't my favourite place. It was fascinating, spending time doing rocky intertidal zonal surveys and the like, but I knew there was a whole world out there of marine life, and growing up with David Attenborough documentaries and seeing everything from around the world, I really wanted to see that. So the first thing I did when I left uni, just got some basic jobs to save up so I could go and gain some experience. So it's that classic thing, if you can't get a job without experience, you can't get experience without the money to do it, so you need a job. So it's that kind of difficult cycle to escape from. So I ended up working really hard, working late nights, saving some money up, and headed out to Southeast Asia, which is quite common, I think, for a lot of people to go and do. So I did a lot of experience going to different places, India and Thailand, Malaysia, and so on. And it was in Thailand where I got my first open water certification. So I was in an island called Koh Chang. And I was really excited to do it. It was my first time, did all the course in the classroom, and then we finally went out, and I just fell in love with it. It was everything I hoped it to be. So I think the first bit of marine life I saw, doing all our training on the sandy bottom, was a bright, colourful parrotfish that came right past my mask. And it just stopped me in my tracks. Just sort of blown away by its beauty and everything. Not something you'd see in the North Sea. So I was fascinated by it, and I just kind of got hooked from there, really.
Fantastic. And from there, how did you get involved into Reef World? How did you get into the conservation side of diving?
So it sounds disconnected, but it is connected. So while I was at university, is where I met my partner, Chloe Harvey, as well. So she also doing marine biology, wanted to do some more tropical ecology work as well. So we decided to go out together, back out to Southeast Asia to try and get some experience. So we volunteered with a lot of universities, and university in the Philippines. We worked in Borneo for a while. And we were looking to try and get a job, actually. And eventually, after about a year of hopping between all the countries in Southeast Asia, we just couldn't get a job. We just couldn't get employed. So a little disheartened, we decided to spend our last week in Phuket and try and have a bit of a holiday. We went out to the beach, sat in the sun lounger, and I think after about 20 minutes we were bored. we were just like, this is not for us. We're not very good at sitting still. We're more doers than thinkers. So we decided to go and knock on the door of the Phuket Marine Biological Center and just said, look, we're here for another week or so. We'd love to get involved if there's anything we can do to help out. And immediately they said, actually, there's a coral reef specialist who could do with your help, particularly as you're foreigners. A program has just landed on his desk that's working with the dive centres. So, sounded interesting. So we met with a very inspirational and a bit of a mentor to me called Kuhn Nippon Pongsuan in the Phuket Marine Biological Center. And he showed us this green fins program, which sounded interesting. It was a code of conduct for dive centres to follow best practice. And he said he could really do with our help as foreigners, speaking to the foreign-owned operators in Phuket to try and educate them on the code of conduct and to work with that. So we found out this program was also being run in conjunction with an incredible lady called Anne Miller, who was the founder of the Reef-World Foundation. And at the time, it was just a one-man band. It was just her. And she had set the program up in Thailand and had registered it as a charity in the UK. And it was about alternative livelihood programs, trying to get fishermen to move away from extractive fishing techniques to becoming tour guides and cashing in on the booming tourism industry there. But they were also tasked with supporting this green fins program. And at first, I was a bit surprised. I thought, why is there an external program for best practice for sustainability for the environment? Isn't that hardwired into the training agencies' courses? So obviously there's safety. I mean, Dan back then was a big well-known leader in terms of overseeing all of the safety side of things. You got the training agencies teaching you how to dive, but there wasn't anything for the environment. There was no rules or regulations how you could behave underwater, which kind of blew me away. So I realized this was the only global standard. And I say global because it was a program with the United Nations Environment Program, and it was being implemented as a pilot project in Thailand. So I skipped my flight. I decided to stay. Chloe actually went back to the UK to try and get a bit more money and come back out again. We were literally rock bottom. We'd run out of cash. So I was teaching English in Phuket to try and make ends meet. I was working down at a local sailing club, teaching some of the orphan children from the tsunami in 2004 how to sail. And then in my spare time, I was also trying to see how we could grow the Green Fins initiative as well. So we decided to go up to the United Nations headquarters in Bangkok and ask them for a bit more money. And they liked our plan and our pitch, and it grew from there. And then we took it to Malaysia and then Indonesia and then the Philippines, and it's just grown bit by bit ever since.
Yeah, there's definitely been dramatic growth in that program over time. I know you recently went from just the on-site accreditation and training where you were able to do hands-on and branch out to give a e-learning and online component so that your materials can reach an even broader audience. How was that transition for y'all, and what type of preparation went into it?
A lot of preparation. And it was a long time coming. It was something we'd wanted to do for a couple of reasons. One was to address the demand, the scale. You know, there's thousands of operators around the world in lots of different countries, and our focus primarily was on protecting coral reefs. But you know, there's a whole bunch of other ecosystems out there, so it's the ocean as a whole. And you've got diving network community all around the world who are very passionate individuals who want to help. So it's an amazing opportunity to try and reach millions of people. So the United Nations set up Green Fins initially to not focus on divers as being the problem, but rather being the solution. So it was trying to use that network of people under the water who can be advocates for protecting marine ecosystems. So we wanted to scale it, and the certification model that we had at the time meant we'd have to get funding and grants to go into a country, work with the governments, and develop a training team. So we have a 6-day course where we train up a pool of assessors, and their job is to go out to a operation, a dive center, and they will carry out like a full environmental assessment or an audit. And they would do a whole day's dive with them, with real customers, so they could see their briefing, see how they manage their waste, see what they clean the boats with, and then they provide feedback to the management at the end of the day. And then they would also provide a 45-minute training course for all of the staff. So it's quite intensive. It's very, very effective at reducing threat, and we saw some great statistics in our data. But it was time consuming, and there was huge demand from all around the world. So going digital was the only option. The downside is that it's a self-evaluation, so it can't be 100% certified as the data that they're providing. But bearing in mind this is a voluntary program, it's not mandatory. The people that you're engaging are wanting to make a change, and they're wanting to give genuine answers because they want to see how they can improve.
Yeah, I've taken the online program as someone who's not in one of those countries with the outreach right there. And even in that, I've learned so much from it. One of my favorite aspects of the entire e-learning program is just how you can teach your dive staff and your dive operation to do positive and corrective communication with guests. There's so much that can go into a dive briefing or a debrief when you're out on the boat that can really make an impact on the individual diver or your dive group as a whole. What are some of the other favorite parts of that program?
Yeah, so this is the dive guide e-course that we have, and then we've got a diver e-course as well, which is focused at the tourists. But the dive guide e-course we created as exactly as you say is a whole bunch of tips and tricks within the modules to try and gently provide some guidance on behavior change. The code of conduct and some of the Green Fins materials and posters that we have are very blunt in terms of like, do not do this. But it's very hard with dive guides and instructors to tell their guests, particularly in certain cultures and communities around the world, they don't want to say no. And sometimes if there's a tipping culture involved as well, they don't want to upset their guests. So we're looking at different ways how they can pass that information on to their guests in a more gentle manner, which will have the impact that they're looking for. So a classic one is, for example, is to remind divers about their fins. We did some research that found out the vast majority of contacts happen with coral reefs within the first few minutes of the dive. And that sounds fairly obvious to divers like you and me. We've been doing it for a long time. It's new equipment, so you hit the water, you're just adjusting your kit. The next thing you know, your fins are right on the coral reef. So we make sure that we try and give them some guidance on how they can say this to their guests about making sure that their trim is flat, straight off as soon as they hit the water, so that they're looking down at the reef and so they're able to stay a good distance away from it without coming into contact with it. So there's lots of guidance around things like that and managing gloves, but it's rather than just saying don't do something, you have to say the why, and it's a bit of a psychological thing. I think when people understand, they're more likely to be invested in something. So, for example, like with fish feeding, it's quite common with people to have snacks, melon or something, in between dives. And for years, everyone just threw it over the boat, not thinking it had much of an impact. But when you explain to guides, it's probably just one or two pieces isn't much. But if you've got 50 boats all doing the same thing 3 times a day in one location, it's kilos and kilos of extra nutrients, which aren't necessarily the natural food which the marine life will be eating. And it makes them realize and think about the scale of it all. So, yeah, it's basically trying to get them to explain why to their guests and giving them greater sort of awareness to the issues at heart.
Yeah, the emphasis on education instead of the harsh correctiveness is so critical, especially when you're, like you mentioned, like the tipping culture is you have people paying to come on this dive boat. They do want a positive experience, but the positive experience needs to be for the guest and for the environment that they're diving in. Because these folks who are going to these incredible places, they're not diving some folks are diving just to be underwater, but a lot of them are there to see the environment. I know for me, when I dive, if I see a shark, it was a fabulous dive. If I see a beautiful coral reef, it was a fantastic dive. That's a really good metric to me, is the environment I'm diving in. And the education is such a critical role in making sure that those environments are able to be sustainable. I know we've already seen some dramatic changes, a lot of these ecosystems, and it's through actions like what Reef-World and the Green Fins are doing to make sure that there is some preservation and education, and the divers are able to continue enjoying these environments. Some particular favorites of mine, I've done a lot of coral reef diving. I used to live down in Florida, so it's in the Florida Keys all the time, but in the 8 years that I lived in Florida, what I saw my first year living there was very, very different than what I've seen when I was just leaving Florida. And even when I go back and visit to dive, those ecosystems have changed dramatically. But they'll always hold a special place in my heart, and that's a place that I really want to make sure and see success in those ecosystems, be able to be successful and other people see them. Do you have a place that you've been diving or a certain ecosystem or dive site that just holds a special place in your heart?
Good question. I've probably dived in about 20 plus countries. I've kind of lost track, but I've had the absolute joy of through my job, and I'm very, very fortunate to go to all these wonderful and different places. It was one of the things that struck me about the diving community is that whether it's a dive center in Japan in the slightly cooler waters in Okinawa or Palau, or going right across to Costa Rica, or in the Caribbean, Antigua and Barbuda, they're all the same. They all have the same mindset, the same culture. So our principle of application with Green Fins works on a global level. So I'm very lucky in that regard. But in terms of special places, I mentioned Palau already. I dived there. I managed to get a really cheap ticket when I was in the Philippines in about 2006. There was a company who was just trying out a new flight route, and you could get to Palau from the Philippines for like $100. So I jumped on that, stayed in the cheapest accommodation we could. We used all our money just to go diving, and there's a dive site called the Peleliu Train. And I remember the guide said at the beginning, okay, we're going to drop down and we'll come around this corner, and then we're likely to see this type of shark, and then we'll go a little further, and then we're going to see some morays poking out of the wall, and then we'll go a little bit further, and then we're highly likely to see this. And he listed about 10 species in order. And I was like, if I saw one of those, it will be special. And then we hit the water, and exactly as he said, all of it happened in the same order as well. I couldn't believe it, and I was like, this is a really unique and magical place. But it was the level of biodiversity of the coral reefs, as well as the fish and the biomass, was just awe-inspiring, and I was really blown away. One thing that really stood out there, I remember when I was where we were facing into the currents, to try and hold on for that dive spot as long as we could. Really strong currents there, hence the name. We saw a load of sharks, and they were coming round, and they come with the current and come right past you. And then they get a bit closer and closer as they get more confident, knowing that you're not a threat to them. And one came right past me, and you can see its eye checking it out. I'm sure you've seen this. But hanging out of its mouth was this huge hook that was going right through its mouth with a long, long, long trail of fishing line coming out the back of it. And I was gobsmacked because it was in a marine protected area, and sharks are well preserved in that area, or were at the time. So I was kind of gobsmacked by that. Here we are in the most pristine place, very low fishing pressure, and yet here's a shark with a huge hook hanging out of its mouth. And then I saw that time and time again in lots of different places. One time in Thailand, I was doing an underwater cleanup, found a load of fishing line on the reef, and using my knife and scissors, slowly peeling it off the reef. Got separated from my buddy, just out of eyesight. But I knew that we're all doing the same thing. We all, with our bums in the air, trying to get all the litter out of the reef. And the line then suddenly went off the reef and went out into the blue. So I was wrapping it around a plastic bottle I'd found. And then the line got taut. And then I noticed the line was moving to the left and to the right. And then the next thing I knew, it got slack, and a shark came right at me. And it was only a small reef shark, but it was heading right towards me. And I realized I was attached to the shark, and it was wrapped around me. So I had to cut the line And then I realized there's another shark with a hook in its mouth and a long line coming off the back. So these kind of experiences have a lot of impact on me, and just everything I can do to strive to raise more awareness and do more with green fins is my mantra, really.
It's really unfortunate to be able to see the impact of humans on such remote areas. I was lucky enough to spend quite some time in Galapagos, and one of the most distinct dives that I did there is it's all cold water. It's not the beautiful coral reef you expect, but it's this incredible megafauna that you see. And me and my group were hop into the water, we descend, and we see the hugest fishing net under. And we said, okay, we don't need to do the fun dive we were going to do. We're going to pull this net up today. But you think Galapagos, you think this is such a remote place. It should feel so untouched. And even in these places that are so hard to get to, you're still seeing the impact on almost every dive of some way that unfortunately humans have really impacted the ecosystem. So it's the Green Fins initiatives that y'all have in place to start and continue educating folks on what they can do. It's critical to make sure these environments are able to be sustainable, not just for our divers, but I know you know this, and I'd ask you to talk a little bit more on it, but coral reefs don't just impact divers. They have a huge impact on the world as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big driver for the Reef-World Foundation. We're a UK charity, and we're held accountable basically to our stakeholders. And our stakeholders are the communities that depend on marine tourism to enhance their quality of life. It's as simple as that. And having lived in Asia for 10 plus years, I know how important it is for those local communities to depend on a healthy and functioning ecosystem. I've also seen the downside where there's been a bit of a boom and bust approach to tourism. You get as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and then that environment starts to deteriorate. And then through word of mouth and with the internet and reviews, people stop going there, and people who have spent all of their or invested all of their savings on building a big hotel can't fill it anymore. It's too expensive to run, and then it's a problem. So for us, it's about sustainable use of coastal and marine ecosystems as a whole, and working with the communities and getting their input. So I'm very aware, I'm very privileged for my background and to be able to go to all of these places. So I want to make sure I can use that privilege to the best of my advantage. And it's not a case of myself or anyone else in our organisation saying, you're doing it wrong, this is how you should do it. It's more, I can see there's a problem, what do you think needs to happen? So we work very closely with governments, and we're very good at being that connect, or that bridge between the public and the private sector. And so we can help governments implement a strategic plan, we can help them write a policy, or maybe review some outdated legislation, and see where they can improve. But we do that with the community's engagement. So it's not just the dive centres we work with, we're also working at the whole of the supply chain locally, the hotels, the restaurants, even any of the transport facilities that are set up there. They're all dependent on the dive and the snorkel dollar that's coming into the country. And they've all got some great ideas of how to overcome some of these solutions. So to be able to feed that back to governments is a real privilege, actually. And also to see the change occurring over time and seeing destinations becoming, in their own name, like an eco destination or a green destination, is fantastic to see.
Absolutely. Working at that high level with all these organizations is so critical. And also the individual divers themselves. Every diver can make an impact on making sure the ecosystem's good. So what are some takeaways from the Green Fins education that the individual diver can hear from this and then go back into their next dive and say, hey, if I do this, I can do my little part in making sure the environment's healthy?
Yeah, it's a good question. The simple thing is to raise your own awareness, and we have an enormous amount of resources on our website. So if you go to greenfins.net, you'll be able to see lots of tips and tricks and things that you can do there. A great thing is, which is what we encourage all of our Green Fins members to send to their guests before they leave, is a pre-departure checklist, for example. So we have a sort of a saying like the dive starts at home, and it's really to get the tourists to think before they leave, what can they pack or what can they leave behind, and also what can they take back home with them. So if they are going to some less developed countries or some small island developing states or something where they don't have the infrastructure to deal with waste and recycling, to not take anything out that they could leave there. And what I mean by that is if they're using any like shampoo bottles or plastic which are nearly finished, if they do finish it, bring that back to their home country where they can recycle it. Making sure you choose the right sunscreen is a big one. And I think there's more and more research coming out saying just how damaging sunscreen is, particularly for coral reefs, but also other marine life and notably fish. And that goes to both freshwater and marine as well. So again, do your research. There are some labels out there, Stream to Sea, for example, make a fantastic range of lotions and creams which do not harm the marine environments. So have a look to see what you can buy before you go out and think about what you're leaving behind and what you're coming back. But I think also in your behaviour, so when you're in the water is a key thing. And a simple thing is just be an observer. Try not to interact. Try not to touch anything. So I appreciate a lot of people accidentally touch things. So think about what you could do to prevent yourself from accidentally touching. So making sure you do a buoyancy check. You could do it in a pool beforehand, making sure you practice or enhance your diving skills before you go to certain locations where there might be a strong current. If you've only done a few dives, making sure that you've got the right level of certification to go to the dive sites that you're wanting to see certain unique species. But another key one is for photographers as well, and nearly everyone has a camera now, ranging from a small micro camera to a large rig setup. And it's not just about how you take pictures, but how you interact with marine life is very important. And I think nowadays in this sort of world of clicking and expecting something to arrive, our expectation of wanting to see something or have something is very high nowadays. So if people want to see a blue-ringed octopus, for example, but it's not quite fluorescing, they might try and agitate it and stuff like that. Trying to get octopus or squid out of holes with pokey sticks, using their dive knives and rocks and stuff to get crabs out. It's not a great idea. It's just not going to help the marine environment in any way. And it also ruins the uniqueness and how special that event is as well. So fish feeding is something that we try and advocate to not do because it's an unnatural behaviour. You're seeing an aggregation of marine life in a location where it wouldn't normally be. So it takes away the uniqueness and special moment of it as well.
Yeah, and how we interact with the wildlife can change their behavior over time, because we might think, all right, well, I'm one person. I'm just going to do this one little thing once, and that's fine, but it's the pattern. You mentioned it earlier. If there's 50 boats a day coming to the same dive location, and that one diver on that one dive says, oh, I'm just going to do this one little thing, but one person from every boat that day thinks that's 50 times that a behavior is being reinforced for the marine life in that ecosystem. So we really do make a big impact, and it's up to us as divers or dive operators and professionals to decide if that impact's going to be a positive one or a negative one for that ecosystem. So being conscious and knowledgeable makes a world of difference, and y'all are really putting all of the information out there for people to access. I know it's on your website. I'm lucky enough to be a part of the Green Fins Hub online. If you could talk a little bit about that, but it's a great community where people can share ideas and what type of environmental work they're doing, or say, hey, I've got this going on. Has anyone else ever dealt with something like this, and how are you working around it?
Yeah, absolutely. So every Green Fins member, whether you're certified or digital, will have access to the community forum. And we developed that as an area basically for like-minded individuals to share their problems, and their grievances and so on, and to help each other out. And it's taken off way more than we expected, which is great. So there's topics ranging in there from how to deal with looking or sourcing environmentally friendly cleaning agents for their vessels or for their equipment, or if someone's doing a cleanup in a local area, they can put a post out and they can get other dive centres or divers to come and join. So it's been a really cool resource, and we've now got thousands of divers from around the world, all sharing unique ideas, and we celebrate certain days, like of course International Coastal Cleanup events, but also like celebrating like Paddy Women's Day and things like that as well. So I know you're in there as well, and you've seen some of the chat that goes on, and it can get quite heated in terms of how passionate people are. But I see that as a huge resource for good. You know, if someone's passionate about something, it means they care about something. And I think that's what keeps us all going, is that we're all full of hope in our team. We always are focusing on the optimistic side of things. And I think in this global climate at the moment, in terms of the data that's coming out from like the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, and as I'm sure everyone's aware, the global bleaching events that have been taking place more in closer frequency, it's quite easy for people to lose hope and get depressed about it all and think, I can't make a difference. Well, I can tell you from our data, collectively, everyone is making a huge difference. So our goal is just to keep scaling and get more and more people on board, and the community forum is a great resource to do that.
Absolutely. You're empowering people with knowledge and guidance on how to be environmentally friendly and bring their entire little niche, their operation, their dive world into that same mindset. So the work y'all are doing is fantastic, and I'm so glad that we have advocates like you in the dive space who are working together to make the environment healthier, make sure it's sustainable for longer, and making sure that all divers have a chance to see the beauty that's underwater in its most healthy state. So thank you a lot, JJ. I really appreciate you taking the time today to chat with me about green fins, Reef-World, and everything that y'all do to help our dive world.
Well, it's my pleasure. Like I say, thanks for having us on, and look forward to working with Dan.